Event 4, the American Revolution in 1776. A bold idea shook the world. Not a battle, not a king, not an empire, but an idea that people, ordinary people, could govern themselves. This was the beginning of something revolutionary, the birth of a nation, the United States. A world ruled by empires. To understand this moment, we must step back into the 18th century. The world was dominated by powerful empires. Among them stood the mighty British Empire, stretching across continents, commanding trade and ruling millions. Across the Atlantic Ocean, 13 colonies belonged to Britain. They were prosperous, growing, and full of potential, but they were not free. The colonies were home to farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and thinkers. They built towns, traded goods, and created communities. But every major decision, taxes, laws, governance, was controlled from far away in London. And that distance began to create tension. After the costly 7 Years' War, Britain was deep in debt. The solution: tax the colonies. The British government introduced laws like the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act, taxes on paper, on goods, on tea. But the colonists were furious, not just because of the taxes, but because they had no voice. Taxation without representation, a phrase that would echo through history. Rising resistance, protests began, boycotts spread, tensions grew. In 1770, things turned deadly. The Boston Massacre. British soldiers, colonists, fear, confusion, gunfire. 5 colonists were killed. The event shocked the colonies and fueled anger. Then came one of the most iconic acts of defiance. The Boston Tea Party. Disguised as Native Americans, colonists boarded British ships and dumped tea into the harbor, an act of protest, a message: we will not be controlled. Britain responded harshly. Punitive laws were passed, known as the Intolerable Acts. Ports were closed. Governments were restricted. Military presence increased. The colonies were pushed further toward rebellion. Ideas began to spread, dangerous ideas, radical ideas, freedom, rights, self-rule. Thinkers like Thomas Paine wrote powerful words. His pamphlet Common Sense ignited minds. He argued that monarchy was outdated and that independence was necessary. People began to believe this was no longer just protest. It was becoming a revolution. In 1775, war broke out. The first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. Colonists, now called patriots, took up arms against the British Army. Farmers became soldiers. Blacksmiths became fighters. Ordinary people facing one of the most powerful militaries in the world. At the center of this struggle stood a man, George Washington, a soldier, a leader, a symbol of resilience. He was chosen to lead the Continental Army, but the odds were against him. His army was undertrained, poorly supplied, and often outmatched. Yet Washington endured. Through harsh winters, through defeats, through uncertainty. The war was not glorious, it was brutal. At Valley Forge, soldiers suffered freezing temperatures, hunger, disease. Many died, but they did not give up. They believed in something greater: freedom. Then in 1776, everything changed. The colonies made a decision, not just to fight but to break away completely. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. Written by leaders including Thomas Jefferson, it declared that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A bold statement, a dangerous statement, a revolutionary statement. This was no longer just a colonial rebellion. It became a global conflict. France, a rival of Britain, joined the American cause, providing money, troops, and naval support. This alliance changed everything. Battles raged, victories and defeats, but one moment stood out. The Battle of Saratoga, a turning point. It convinced France that the Americans could win. Hope grew, momentum shifted. In 1781, the war reached its climax. At Yorktown, American and French forces surrounded the British Army, led by General Cornwallis. There was no escape, no reinforcements, no victory. He surrendered. The war was over. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain recognized American independence. A new nation was born. The United States of America. But independence was only the beginning. Now came the challenge: how do you govern a nation? Without a king, without an empire. Leaders gathered, debated, argued, and eventually created a constitution, a system built on laws, balance, and representation. The American Revolution was not just about land or taxes or war. It was about an idea that power belongs to the people, that government should serve, not control. This idea spread across the world. Inspired revolutions in France, in Latin America, and beyond. It challenged monarchies. It questioned authority. It changed history. But the revolution was not perfect. Freedom did not reach everyone. Slavery continued. Indigenous peoples were displaced. Women were excluded from political power. The promise of equality remained incomplete. Yet the American Revolution remains one of the most influential events in human history. It proved that a people could rise, challenge an empire, and build something new. In 1776, a spark was lit, a revolution of ideas, a fight for freedom, a declaration to the world that people could govern themselves, and from that moment the course of history was forever changed. Event 5, the Industrial Revolution. There was a time when human hands built the world, when farms fed nations and crafts shaped economies, a time when life moved at the rhythm of nature. But then everything changed. Machines replaced hands. Factories replaced farms, and history entered a new age, the Industrial Revolution. Before the machine age, before this transformation, most people lived in rural communities. They worked the land, grew their own food, made goods by hand. Production was slow but personal. A single craftsman might spend days, even weeks, creating one product. Life was simple but limited. Then came innovation. The revolution began in the late 18th century in Great Britain. A combination of factors made it possible: access to coal and iron, growing population, expanding trade networks, and a culture of innovation. Inventors began asking a powerful question: what if machines could do the work faster? At the center of this transformation was a breakthrough invention, the steam engine, improved by James Watt. This machine could convert heat into motion. It powered factories, pumped water, and drove engines. For the first time in history, production was no longer limited by human or animal strength. One of the first industries to change was textiles. Clothing production had always been slow, manual, and labor-intensive, but inventions like the spinning jenny and the power loom changed everything. Threads could be spun faster, fabric could be woven quicker, factories began to rise. The rise of factories became the new centers of production, large buildings filled with machines and workers. People left the countryside and moved into cities. Urbanization had begun. Cities grew rapidly. Crowded, noisy, and often unplanned. The world was shifting from rural to industrial. Life changed dramatically. Instead of working at home or on farms, people now worked in factories. Long hours, strict schedules, repetitive tasks. Work was no longer flexible. It was controlled by the clock. Even children were not spared. They worked in factories, mines, and mills for long hours in dangerous conditions. Small hands were useful for cleaning machines and reaching tight spaces, but accidents were common. Lives were lost. Childhood was replaced by labor. As cities expanded, housing could not keep up. Workers lived in crowded slums, poor sanitation, dirty water, disease. Families packed into tiny spaces. The promise of opportunity came with harsh reality. Factories burned coal, smoke filled the air, rivers became polluted. The environment began to suffer. For the first time in history, human activity was reshaping the planet on a massive scale. Industrial revolution also transformed the economy. A new system began to dominate: capitalism. Business owners, industrialists, invested in factories, machines, and production. Their goal: profit. This created wealth but also inequality. The gap between rich and poor, a new social divide emerged. On one side, factory owners, wealthy, powerful, influential. On the other, workers, struggling, overworked, underpaid. The gap between rich and poor grew wider. But workers did not remain silent. They began to organize, to protest, demand better conditions, shorter working hours, fair wages, safer environments. Trade unions were formed. A new struggle had begun, not against kings, but against systems. The Industrial Revolution did not just change factories, it transformed movement. Railways were built. Steam-powered trains carried goods and people faster than ever before. Canals connected cities. Ships powered by steam crossed oceans. The world became smaller. Global impact. The effects spread beyond Britain to Europe and to America. And eventually, the world. Countries industrialized. Competition grew. Empires expanded. The global economy was born. Despite the challenges, the Industrial Revolution brought progress. Mass production made goods cheaper. More people could afford clothing, tools, and basic items. Technology advanced rapidly. Medicine improved. Communication evolved. The telegraph connected people across distances. By the late 19th century, a second wave of innovation emerged. Electricity replaced steam. Factories became more efficient. New industries developed: steel, chemicals, oil. Inventors like Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla pushed the boundaries of possibility. The modern world was taking shape, but progress came at a cost: exploitation, pollution, inequality. The same machines that built wealth also created suffering. The same factories that produced goods also consumed lives. The Industrial Revolution marked a turning point. It changed how we work, how we live, how we think. Laid the foundation for the modern world. Cities, industries, technology, everything we see today traces back to this moment. And the story did not end there. The Industrial Revolution paved the way for future revolutions, technological, digital, and beyond, each one building on the last. Machines replaced hands, factories replaced farms, and the world was never the same again. The Industrial Revolution was not just a period of change, it was the birth of the modern age, a story of innovation and sacrifice, progress, and consequence. A reminder that every step forward comes with a price. Event 6. World War I. In 1914, the world stood on the edge of something it did not yet understand. Empires ruled vast lands, kings and emperors held power, and beneath the surface, tension quietly burned. Europe was not at peace. It was waiting for a spark. That spark came on a summer day, June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo. A young nationalist named Gavrilo Princip stepped forward, raised his weapon, and fired. His target, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In seconds, 2 lives were lost. But what followed would cost millions more. The assassination did not just kill a man, it shattered a fragile system of alliances. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia, Russia defended Serbia, Germany backed Austria-Hungary, France stood with Russia, and Britain would soon join them, like falling dominoes. The world's most powerful nations were pulled into war. By August 1914, Europe was at war. But this was no ordinary conflict. This was industrialized warfare on a scale never seen before. Young men marched proudly to the front lines, believing they would return home by Christmas. They were wrong. The war quickly turned into a nightmare. On the Western Front, soldiers dug into the earth, creating miles of trenches that stretched across countries, mud, rats, disease, and constant fear. This was trench warfare, where progress was measured in meters, and survival was never guaranteed. Between the trenches lay no man's land, a deadly strip of land filled with barbed wire shell craters and bodies that could not be recovered. To cross it was almost certain death. New weapons changed the nature of war forever. Machine guns cut down soldiers in seconds. Artillery shells rained destruction from miles away. And then came something even more terrifying: gas. Poisonous clouds drifted across the battlefield, burning lungs, blinding eyes, causing soldiers to suffocate where they stood. Men scrambled for masks, many too late. It was a new kind of horror, invisible, silent, merciless. The war spread beyond Europe. It became truly global. Fighting erupted in Africa, the Middle East, and across the seas. Colonies were drawn into the conflict. Millions from around the world were pulled into a war they did not start. At sea, submarines hunted ships beneath the waves. Germany's U-boats attacked without warning, sinking civilian vessels and changing naval warfare forever. In 1917, a new power entered the war, the United States. After years of staying neutral, they joined the Allies. Fresh troops, new resources, and renewed hope. But the cost was unimaginable. Over 16 million lives lost. Soldiers, civilians, entire communities wiped out. A generation scarred forever. The world that existed before 1914 was gone. Empires collapsed. The German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire all fell in the aftermath. In 1918, after 4 long years, the fighting finally stopped. An armistice was signed, the guns fell silent, but peace was fragile. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh punishments on Germany. Borders were redrawn, nations reshaped, but resentment lingered. They called it the war to end all wars. A war so devastating, so brutal, that humanity believed it would never happen again. They were wrong. Because beneath the silence of peace, anger was growing, economies were struggling, nations were divided, and in the shadows new leaders were rising. The world had survived its first global war, but it was already moving toward something even darker. Transition to next event, Event 7, World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history. War that would consume continents, destroy cities, and take more than 70 million lives. The seeds of this war were planted years before the first shot was fired. After World War I, the world tried to rebuild, but peace was fragile. The Treaty of Versailles left Germany humiliated, economically broken, and filled with anger. Out of that anger rose a man who promised restoration, power, and revenge. His name, Adolf Hitler. Through powerful speeches and propaganda, Hitler gained control of Germany, rebuilt its military, defied international agreements, and fueled a dangerous ideology, one based on expansion, control, and racial supremacy. In 1939, the world would once again be pulled into war. Germany invaded Poland, and with that single act, World War II began. Britain and France declared war on Germany. The world split once again into two sides, the Allies and the Axis powers. Germany moved with terrifying speed, blitzkrieg, lightning war, planes infantry. Striking with precision and force, country after country fell. Poland, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Europe was collapsing. Meanwhile, another empire was rising in the east. Japan expanded aggressively across Asia, seeking power, resources, and dominance. Then came a moment that changed everything. December 7, 1941, a surprise attack. Attack on Pearl Harbor. Explosions lit up the sky, battleships burned, thousands died. The United States entered the war. And the conflict became truly global. But beyond the battlefields, a deeper horror unfolded, the Holocaust, a systematic attempt to eliminate entire populations, 6 million Jews and millions of others murdered in camps in silence, in unimaginable suffering. This was not just war, it was human cruelty at its absolute worst. The fighting raged across the world. In Europe, North Africa, the Pacific Ocean, airplanes filled the skies, bombs fell on cities, civilians became targets. Then came one of the most decisive moments in the war. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Thousands of Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. Under heavy fire, through chaos, through fear, they pushed forward step by step. It marked the beginning of the end. The Allies began to reclaim Europe. Germany was being pushed back. In April 1945, as defeat closed in, Adolf Hitler took his own life. Shortly after, Germany surrendered. But the war was not yet over. In the Pacific, fighting continued. And then the world witnessed something it had never seen before, a weapon of unimaginable power, the atomic bomb. In August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In seconds, entire cities were destroyed, lives erased, shadows burned into walls. Soon after, Japan surrendered. World War II was over, but the cost was beyond comprehension. Over 70 million dead, cities reduced to rubble. Families torn apart, a world forever changed. From the ashes of destruction, a new global order began to rise. In 1945, nations came together to form something new, a hope for peace. The United Nations, the goal to prevent another world war, to promote cooperation, to protect human rights. But even as one war ended, another kind of conflict began, not with bombs but with tension, ideology, power, the Cold War, a silent battle between superpowers, a world divided. World War II did not just end a conflict, it reshaped the future, redefined power, and reminded humanity of both its darkest depths and its greatest resilience. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video. Part 3 will blow your mind.